most dangerous enemy is the one that looks like a friend. On Armistice Day, 1940, the Great Lakes wore a mask of pure serenity, a balmy 60-degree breeze, and a violet sky so beautiful it felt like a gift. It was a siren song that lured veteran captains to push their heavy freighters to the absolute limit. But high above, a silent executioner was taking shape, defying every law of physics ever known. How did men with 40 years of salt in their veins sail blindly into a meat grinder they should have seen coming? Was this a disaster born of human arrogance or a chilling systemic failure triggered by a single quiet office in Chicago? As we retrace the terrifying final hours of the Armistice Day Blizzard, we will expose the chain of fatal decisions that transformed a vacation paradise into a frozen graveyard. Stay with us until the very end, because the answer to who is truly to blame lies buried in a secret that the waves kept for decades. On November 7th, 1940, a localized low-pressure system slipped onto the shores of Washington state. While it initially appeared to be a standard autumn disturbance, it carried a violent, erratic energy that immediately claimed its first victim, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. In a harrowing display of aeroelastic fluttering and engineering oversight, immortalized in grainy black and white film, the world's third longest suspension bridge twisted like a blade of grass under mere 40-mile-per-hour winds before disintegrating into the Puget Sound. To the unsuspecting public, the bridge's collapse was a freak structural failure. However, in the grander tapestry of maritime history, it served as a grim, almost supernatural omen. There was a chilling synchronicity at play. As the concrete and steel of Tacoma fell, the massive steel freighters of the Great Lakes were unknowingly entering their final 96 hours of existence. As this Pacific disturbance scaled the towering Rocky Mountains, it underwent a terrifying metamorphosis. But the real danger lay in a rare atmospheric handshake. From the south, a second moisture-laden disturbance fueled by the volatile warm air of the Gulf of Mexico was surging northward. Over the Great Plains, these two invisible titans collided in a perfect, deadly symmetry. This collision triggered a phenomenon meteorologists call rapid cyclogenesis, or more hauntingly, a weather bomb. By definition, a storm becomes a bomb when its central pressure plummets by at least 24 millibars within a 24-hour window. This system didn't just meet that threshold, it shattered it with a ferocity rarely seen in mid-continental history. The pressure spiraled down to a staggering 973 millibars, turning the storm into a massive atmospheric vacuum, a meat grinder that began sucking in every scrap of energy from thousands of square miles. Monday, November 11th, 1940 began not with a roar, but with a visual masterpiece that would haunt the survivors for a lifetime. On the steamer, Charles C. West First Assistant Engineer John Schmidt, an avid photographer with a keen eye for the lake's moods, was shaken awake by a fellow crew member. The message was urgent, but purely aesthetic: grab your camera. What Schmidt captured that morning was a sunrise of impossible, almost supernatural beauty. The sky was a bruised palette of deep crimson, burnt orange, and violet, reflecting off a Lake Michigan that lay as flat and tranquil as a sheet of polished glass. The air was unseasonably balmy, a spring like 65 degrees Fahrenheit, feeling more like a gentle gift than a warning. But for the seasoned Lakers, this beauty was a lethal deception. In meteorological terms, this eerie calm was the intake phase of the massive atmospheric vacuum forming to the west. The lakes were literally holding their breath before the plunge. As these men admired the horizon, they were standing on the decks of a floating past. By 1940, the Great Lakes were dominated by a fleet of aging veterans, simple steel-hulled freighters built during the frantic construction boom at the turn of the century. Ships like the SS Anna C. Minch, built in 1903 as hull, number 415, were the backbone of the industry. At 380 feet long and nearly 4,300 gross tons, the Minch was a sturdy workhorse that had survived a dozen collisions and groundings over its 37-year career. However, these vessels lacked the structural elasticity and the high-output propulsion required to battle a weather bomb. They were built for efficiency in a different era, and they were about to be tested by a future they weren't designed to survive. The pressure on these aging hulls was not just coming from the atmosphere, but from the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. In 1940, the United States was rapidly pivoting to become the arsenal of democracy. While the nation was technically at peace, the war ravaging Europe had turned American steel mills into insatiable monsters. They were starving for the iron ore and coal buried in the north. This geopolitical hunger created a brutal economic reality known as the late season run. Ship owners and captains were under relentless pressure to squeeze every last ton of cargo out of the lakes before the winter freeze. It was a high-stakes gamble where human lives were weighed against industrial quotas and wartime profit. The Armistice Day disaster was not merely a meteorological fluke. It was the inevitable collision of nature's fury and human economic desperation. The most tragic failure, however, was the systemic blindness of the era's technology. In 1940, meteorology was an analog science of guesswork, relying on primitive weather balloons and manual observations that were often hours out of date. The U.S. Weather Bureau in Chicago was the regional nerve center, yet it suffered from a staggering bureaucratic flaw. It operated primarily as a 9-to-5 office. As the holiday weekend commenced, the office was largely unstaffed. While the weather bomb accelerated with predatory speed, vital warnings were essentially stuck in a dormant system because the workday had ended and the holiday had begun. When Captain Donald Kennedy of the Anna C. Minch or Captain Charles W. Allen of the William B. Davock checked their morning reports, they saw only mild gale advisories from the night before. Guided by obsolete data, these mariners relied on the only tools they trusted, their instincts and their barometers. But on this day, the transition was so violent that by the time the barometer needles began their terrifying plunge, the exit was already barred. The trap had closed, and the perfect sunrise was about to dissolve into a white hell. By the stroke of midday on November 11th, the deceptive rainbow sunrise that had greeted the region was incinerated by the advancing front of the weather bomb. This was not a storm that built up over hours. It was a physical wall of pressurized air that struck the heartland like a hammer. Within a matter of mere hours, the thermometer became a witness to a terrifying freefall as temperatures plummeted from a balmy 65 degrees Fahrenheit to a lethal 10 degrees Fahrenheit. This rapid cooling wasn't just a weather change, it was a biological assault. The first victims were the hundreds of duck hunters who had ventured out onto the marshes of the Mississippi and Fox rivers, drawn by the warmth of a holiday and the promise of a quiet day in nature. Dressed in light shirt sleeves, many had left their heavy coats in their vehicles, believing the spring-like weather would hold. When the wind suddenly shifted and surged to a sustained 80 miles per hour, These men were instantly marooned. From a forensic medical perspective, what followed was a clinical descent into the horrors of hypothermia. In the icy marshes of November, the physics of survival are brutal water conducts heat away from the human body approximately 25 times faster than air. As the freezing spray saturated their thin cotton clothing, their core temperatures began to crash almost immediately. The body, in a desperate attempt at self-preservation, initiated a process of peripheral vasoconstriction, pulling blood away from the limbs and skin to insulate the vital internal organs. However, this biological survival mechanism carried a fatal price: the loss of dexterity. As blood flow ceased to the fingers and toes, the hunters lost the fine motor skills required to row their boats, reload their firearms, or even grasp a life ring. Their muscles, deprived of heat and oxygen, became rigid and unresponsive. For at least 49 of these men, the holiday ended in a literal deep freeze. Their bodies were discovered days later, frozen into the very reeds of the marshes, some still in the posture of seeking shelter, preserved in ice like macabre statues, a haunting testament to the speed and fury of the Armistice Day Blizzard. While the tragedy unfolded in the marshes, the storm's physical power was rewriting the geography of the urban coastline. As the gale slammed into Chicago and Gary, Indiana, it triggered a rare and terrifying phenomenon known to limnologists as a seiche. This is essentially a standing wave in an enclosed or semi-enclosed body of water, but on Lake Michigan that day, it was of a catastrophic scale. The sustained hurricane-force wind screaming out of the southwest acted like a giant invisible hand, physically pushing the gargantuan mass of Lake Michigan toward the northeast. The result was a dramatic and unnatural tilting of the lake's surface. In Chicago, the water level didn't just recede, it dropped by an astounding 5 feet in a matter of hours. The withdrawal was so violent that it momentarily reversed the flow of the Calumet River, pulling the river's water back toward the lakebed. Yet, as the west side of the lake was emptied, the east side, the Michigan shoreline, bore the brunt of the accumulated energy. The water piled up in a massive surge, spawning rogue-like waves that exceeded 30 feet in height. This surge didn't just wash over the land, it attacked the infrastructure. Coastal windows were shattered by the sheer force of the wind-blown spray. Utility poles were snapped like matchsticks, and the very foundations of coastal buildings were scoured by the unrelenting pressure of the surge. The battle then moved from the shore to the open water, where the ships caught in this meat grinder were experiencing the full mechanical terror of the weather bomb. Near the infamous Death Store passage in Green Bay, the 416-foot SS Sinaloa became one of the first major casualties of the day. The Sinaloa was a formidable vessel, but the chaotic multi-directional waves created by the shifting wind made it impossible to maintain a steady heading. The ship was subjected to such extreme torsional stress and violent rocking that its internal mechanical systems began to fail. The steam lines, the metaphorical veins of the ship, were subjected to relentless vibration until they rubbed against the internal hull frames and ruptured. In a matter of minutes, the Sinaloa went from a powered freighter to a drifting 4,000-ton ghost. Powerless and at the mercy of the gale, she was driven onto a jagged reef off Sac Bay. The scene was one of raw desperation as the hull ground against the rock, threatening to break apart in the freezing surf. In an extraordinary display of community courage, local fishermen, realizing that no official rescue could reach the ship in time, gathered on the icy beach. They established a breacher's buoy, a primitive manual pulley system involving a canvas seat suspended from a rope, and began the agonizing process of hauling the crew to safety. One by one, the sailors were pulled through the churning sub-zero surf, their lives hanging by a single rope, until the entire crew was rescued. Further south, at the maritime hub of Ludington, the battle took on an even more dramatic tone. Here, the Great Lakes car ferries, massive heavy-duty vessels built to carry entire railroad trains across the water, were fighting a losing war against the waves. These ships were among the sturdiest on the lakes, yet even they were being battered into submission. The Père Marquette, number 21, arrived at the harbor mouth in a dire state, its hull bruised and battered from a series of punishing collisions with harbor pilings as the captain fought to navigate the blinding whiteout. But it was the city of Flint, the pride of the fleet, that faced the most harrowing ordeal. Driven broadside by the relentless 30-foot waves, the ferry was pushed dangerously close to the jagged concrete breakwater. The ship was on the verge of being pulverized, a disaster that would have surely meant the loss of everyone on board. At this moment of ultimate peril, Captain Jin Vang made a decision that would go down in the annals of legendary seamanship. Recognizing that he could no longer fight the lake, he chose to surrender to it on his own terms. He ordered the seacocks, the valves that allow water into the ship's bilge for cooling or ballast, to be opened wide. It was an act that seemed counterintuitive to every instinct of a sailor. He was intentionally sinking his own vessel. As the cold water rushed in, the city of Flint became heavy and sluggish, eventually settling her keel deep into the sand of the lakebed just off the North Beach. This intentional grounding stabilized the ship, preventing the waves from tossing her against the rocks like a toy. It was a brilliant, desperate gamble that successfully stabilized the vessel and saved 52 lives. However, while the ship was stable, the people on board remained trapped. The waves continued to smash over the decks, sending plumes of water 50 feet into the air, and for the 48 crew members and 4 passengers, the night became an ordeal of wet, freezing isolation as they watched the spotlights of onlookers on the beach, unable to reach them. As night fell over the Michigan coast, the atmosphere in towns like Ludington and Pentwater shifted from frantic activity to an agonizing, silent vigil. The storm had rendered the Coast Guard almost powerless. The wind was so fierce that Captain A.E. Christopherson had to order his watchmen to abandon the Coast Guard towers for fear they would topple over. On the piers and beaches, the families of the sailors stood as silhouettes against the wind-whipped snow. They strained their eyes toward a black, chaotic horizon, knowing that their fathers, husbands, and sons were somewhere out there in the maelstrom, fighting a battle they could not see. The unseasonable warmth of the morning now felt like a cruel irony, a siren song that had lured their loved ones into the jaws of a monster. By the following morning, the first light of dawn revealed the true cost of the previous 24 hours. The lake began to vomit back the evidence of its fury. At first, it was small things, life rings, wooden hatch covers, and splintered pieces of decking. But as the morning progressed, the community had to pivot from a mission of hope to a grim reality of recovery. Local residents, many of them veterans of the lake themselves, walked the frozen beaches with heads bowed. They weren't looking for survivors anymore. They were looking for their neighbors. They recovered the frozen bodies of men they had known their entire lives, sailors who had been caught in the whiteout and had no chance against the hypothermic shock of the water. These images of frozen men being carried off the beaches in the gray light of a November morning remain among the most powerful and heartbreaking in the maritime history of the Great Lakes. The community was left to grapple with the question that would haunt the region for decades. How could a day that started so beautifully end in such total, unmitigated destruction? This was only the beginning of the tally. For while the coastal towns recovered their dead, the fate of the great steel freighters further out in the deep water remained a terrifying mystery hidden behind a curtain of snow and 30-foot waves. The vigil was far from over, and the secrets of the 1940 Armistice Day storm were only just beginning to wash ashore. In 1928, at the renowned Swan Hunter and Wigham Richardson shipyard in England, the SS Novadoc was launched. Measuring 77 meters in length and built with a sturdy steel hull, she was considered a highly promising and versatile newcomer by the maritime standards of the time. However, all the engineering excellence from Britain proved utterly powerless against the extraordinary fury of the Great Lakes on that fateful day. As the 1940 meteorological bomb reached its devastating peak, Lake Michigan turned into a massive meat grinder. In the moment when the wind abruptly shifted from the northeast to the west, the Novadoc fell into a death trap. It became trapped in a wave trough, the most perilous position a ship can face, turning it into the epicenter of one of the most horrifying maritime disasters in Canadian history. Captain Stipe and his crew fought with every ounce of experience they possessed. Stipe repeatedly signaled the engine room, begging his engineers for more steam, more revolutions, anything to get the bow into the wind. But the Novadoc remained unresponsive, her propellers lifting out of the water as she pitched, then plunging into the abyss. There are two theories for this failure. Either the coal being shoveled into the boilers was of such poor, slag-heavy quality that it couldn't generate the necessary heat, or the firemen were so incapacitated by violent seasickness that they simply could not keep the fires fed. Regardless of the cause, the result was a death sentence. The Novadoc became a 4,000-ton piece of driftwood, drifting relentlessly toward the jagged Michigan coastline. In the pre-dawn darkness of Tuesday morning, the ship's journey ended with a bone-jarring impact. She slammed into a sandbar just 150 yards off Juniper Beach, south of Ludington. The force of the grounding combined with the relentless pounding of the surf caused the steel hull to groan and then shatter. The Novadoc was literally severed in two, a jagged chasm opening between the stern and the forward pilot house. It was in this moment of structural collapse that a miniature tragedy occurred, a scene of raw human panic that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Cook Joe Shane and his assistant Philip Flavin, huddled in the stern, believed the ship was about to slide off the bar and sink into deeper water. In a desperate suicidal dash, they attempted to cross the open icy deck to reach the perceived safety of the pilot house. Their crewmates watched from behind reinforced glass, unable to do anything but scream warnings that were drowned out by the gale. As the two men reached for the railing, a massive, freezing wall of water, a rogue wave amplified by the lake's shallow bottom, exploded over the deck. When the spray cleared, the deck was empty. Joe Shane and Philip Flavin had been swept into the black sub-zero void of the lake, gone in an instant. This moment served as a brutal lesson for the remaining 17 men. To step outside was to die. For the next 36 hours, the Novadoc became a floating purgatory. The 17 survivors were split, some in the forward pilot house, others in the galley. The heating systems were dead, and the sub-zero wind screamed through every crack in the shattered superstructure. To stay alive, they were forced into an act of desperate iconoclasm. They began burning the ship's furniture. Wooden chairs, tables, and wooden trim were smashed into kindling to keep small, smoky fires going. They huddled together in the darkness, their clothes frozen stiff, listening to the agonizing screech of steel on stone as the lake began the slow process of pulverizing their ship. Every wave that hit felt like a sledgehammer, and with each jolt, they wondered if the sandbar would finally give way. As the first light of the Tuesday morning touched the coast, the situation of the Novadoc became visible to the world. Sable Point lighthouse keeper William Cruel spotted the wreck through the blizzard and immediately alerted the Ludington Coast Guard. Soon, the beach was lined with onlookers and rescuers. But here, the story takes its most controversial and agonizing turn, the conflict between bureaucratic protocol and human necessity. The U.S. Coast Guard crews arrived on the scene with their surf boats and breacher's buoy equipment. However, Captain A.E. Christopherson of the Ludington station faced a harrowing dilemma. The winds were still gusting at hurricane force, and the surf was a chaotic, churning mess of ice and debris. Citing the extreme risk to personnel and the fact that their small boats would almost certainly be capsized before reaching the wreck, the Coast Guard officially deemed a rescue attempt impossible until the weather subsided. For a day and a half, the official rescuers stood on the shore warm and safe while they watched through binoculars as 17 men slowly froze to death just 150 yards away. To the sailors on the Novadoc, seeing the Coast Guard on the beach but receiving no help was a psychological torture worse than the cold itself. This was the failure of the system, a rigid adherence to safety protocols that prioritized the rescuers over the dying. However, as the hours ticked by, and the government agencies remained paralyzed by their own regulations, the soul of the lakes began to stir in the local community. Captain Clyde Claus of the small fishing tug. Three brothers could no longer stand the sight of the dying men. Claus was not a government official. He was a man who lived by the lake's rules, which dictate that you never leave a brother behind. Along with his crew, Goo Goffier and Joe Fountain, Claus decided that if the Coast Guard wouldn't go, they would. Their decision was, by any modern safety standard, insane. The Three Brothers was a small wooden-hulled tug never meant to handle 30-foot waves and a weather bomb. Ignoring the official orders to stay back, Claus launched his tug into the maelstrom. In a display of seamanship that bordered on the miraculous, he timed the swells with a surgeon's precision. He maneuvered the Three Brothers through the breaking surf, bringing his fragile wooden hull dangerously close to the jagged, razor-sharp steel of the Novadoc's wreck. One by one, the 17 survivors' men, so frozen they could barely move their limbs, were hauled onto the deck of the fishing tug. Some were lowered in makeshift slings. Others were practically thrown across the gap between the ships. Claus and his men worked in a frenzy, knowing that a single mistimed wave would crush both vessels. When the last man was safely on board, Claus turned the Three Brothers back toward Ludington. It wasn't a government agency with high-tech equipment that saved the Novadoc. It was three ordinary men in a wooden boat who decided that the lives of strangers were worth the risk of their own. This act of defiance remains one of the most celebrated moments in maritime history, highlighting a timeless truth in the heart of a storm. A hero isn't the one with the most authority or the best equipment. It is the one who refuses to watch others drown while standing on the safety of the shore. The SS Novadoc would never sail the Great Lakes again. Over the coming weeks, the relentless Michigan surf continued to batter the broken hull until she was pulverized, her steel eventually swallowed by the sand. But her name lives on as a monument to a 36-hour nightmare and the three men who proved that humanity is more powerful than protocol. As we look at the ruins of the 1940 storm, the story of the Novadoc asks us a haunting question. When the world is at its coldest and the official systems fail, who will have the courage to launch their boat into the dark? While the world's attention was fixed on the freezing survivors of the Novadoc, two other steel titans were fighting a losing war in the pitch-black heart of Lake Michigan. These are the stories of the SS Anna C. Minch and the SS William B. Davock, two ships that departed into a perfect sunrise and vanished into a perfect nightmare. The SS Anna C. Minch, commanded by the 55-year-old veteran Captain Donald Kennedy, was a 380-foot Canadian freighter carrying a heavy load of grain. In the dead of night, amidst 30-foot waves and a total whiteout, the Minch simply ceased to exist. All 24 souls on board were lost. From a forensic engineering perspective, the Minch was a victim of her own DNA. As a first-generation steel freighter, she suffered from a fatal lack of hull flexibility. When the storm unleashed its sinusoidal waves, massive peaks of water spaced at intervals that matched the ship's length, the Minch was subjected to a structural nightmare. The bow and stern were simultaneously lifted by two crests, leaving the massive midsection laden with tons of grain suspended in mid-air over a trough. Without the buoyancy of the water to support her midsection, the structural stress reached a breaking point. The steel groaned, buckled, and then experienced a catastrophic structural failure. The Minch didn't just sink, she snapped in two like a brittle twig, plunging her crew into the abyss before they could even reach for a lifebelt. Just miles away, a larger Titan, the SS William B. Davock, met a similarly violent end. Commanded by Captain Charles W. Allen, the 420-foot Davock was a powerhouse of the Interlake Steamship Company, carrying a full load of coal. With a crew of 32, she was thought to be one of the safest vessels on the lakes. Yet she too was overwhelmed, taking all 32 men down with her. For decades, the Davock was a ghost story until a forensic diving expedition in 1974 finally located her remains. The discovery opened a chilling debate about her final seconds, the mystery of the jammed rudder. When the storm clouds finally fractured over Lake Michigan on the morning of November 12th, they revealed a world rendered unrecognizable. The weather bomb had migrated eastward, but it left behind a tally of destruction that fundamentally shattered the maritime community's confidence in their own mastery of the lakes. The statistics were not just numbers, they were a generational trauma. In Lake Michigan alone, at least 66 sailors men with families' histories and decades of experience had been snuffed out in less than 24 hours. The lakebed had become a fresh, cold graveyard for three of the industry's most recognizable steel titans, the Anna C. Minch, the William B. Davock, and the Novadoc. While the Minch and Davock were claimed by the deep water, the Novadoc suffered a slower, more public death, eventually being torn to scrap by the relentless grinding surf off Juniper Beach. But the tragedy of the Armistice Day Blizzard reached far beyond these massive freighters. The lake claimed the small and the humble with equal indifference. Two fishing tugs, the Richard H. and the Indian, vanished so completely from the surface that not a single piece of debris was immediately found. They took their entire crews into the silent deep without so much as a final desperate radio call, leaving behind only empty docks and grieving harbors. For over 3 decades, the final moments of these ships remained locked in a vault of speculation and ghost stories. The maritime world wondered, had they collided in the whiteout? Had they struggled for hours, or was the end instantaneous? The answers finally began to surface in May 1974, when modern forensic diving expeditions located the remains of both the Davock and the Minch. The discovery provided a chilling forensic clarity to the chaos of 1940. Divers found the two massive wrecks lying eerily close to one another on the lake floor, forever anchored in a silent, rusted embrace. This proximity was the final haunting piece of the puzzle. It proved that these vessels, despite their immense scale and the collective wisdom of their veteran captains, were caught in the exact same meat grinder at the storm's violent center. They were defeated by the same laws of physics at the same coordinate at the same terrifying second. It wasn't a series of accidents, it was a mass execution by nature. The wreck revealed that the Davoc's rudder was slammed hard to port and wedged tightly into the propeller blades. This poses a haunting question for maritime analysts. Was it a human error or a mechanical execution? One theory suggests that in a desperate attempt to turn the ship's bow into the wind to prevent capsizing, Captain Allen ordered a turn so aggressive that the aging steering gear failed under the immense pressure of the waves. Another, more terrifying theory suggests that a rogue sister wave struck the stern with such kinetic force that it physically snapped the steel rudder post, driving the massive blade into the spinning propeller. Once the propeller was jammed, the Davoc lost all steerage and power, falling broadside into the trough where the next wave rolled her over like a toy. However, the true legacy of the Armistice Day Blizzard isn't found in the twisted steel under the waves. It is found in the way we listen to the wind today. The sacrifice of those 66 sailors forced a fundamental scorched earth revolution in human safety. The institutional negligence of the 9-to-5 Weather Bureau, which had left the lakes blind during a holiday weekend, was permanently dismantled. Forecasting was transformed into a 24-hour life-critical operation. The regional weather hub was moved to Chicago with a specific mandate: the Great Lakes were no longer to be treated as inland ponds, but as high-risk maritime frontiers. We learned through blood and ice that a rainbow sunrise is not a gift of beauty, but a lethal siren song, and that the falling mercury on a barometer is the only voice of truth worth heeding when the sky turns violet. As we look back from the safety of the present at November 11th, 1940, we are reminded of a painful universal truth that technology often hides from us. We may build our steel fortresses to be longer than city blocks. We may power them with the harnessed might of thousands of horses, and we may convince ourselves that our radars and satellites have finally tamed the wild. But the Great Lakes possess a memory longer than our history, and a fury that is entirely indifferent to our progress. The Armistice Day storm serves as a permanent underwater monument to human fragility. It reminds us that no matter how advanced our engineering becomes, we remain small, finite beings navigating a world that can transition from a masterpiece into a massacre in the blink of an eye. The lake does not care about our industrial quotas, our wartime pressures, our holidays, or our ego. It only knows the cold weight of the water and the absolute silence of the deep. And as the sun sets over Lake Michigan today, the same violet hues that deceived the sailors in 1940 still occasionally paint the horizon. It remains a beautiful, haunting reminder to the next generation of mariners: never ever mistake the calm for the end of the storm. Finally, before we conclude today's message, we stand in silence to honor the 66 sailors and 49 hunters whose lives were claimed by the fury of November 11th, 1940. Let their names be etched not just in the cold steel of wrecks, but in our collective memory. May their souls find rest in the deep, and may we forever respect the heavy price paid on that violet morning. Thank you for walking through this haunting corridor of history with me. If you have a personal story, a family connection to the Great Lakes, or a reflection on these maritime tragedies, please share it in the comments below. Your voice is the bridge that keeps these legends alive. If this journey moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to join our community. Your support allows us to continue uncovering the secrets hidden beneath the waves. Until next time, I'll see you in our future expeditions. Stay safe and never forget the power of the water.